It was business as usual for the Queen.
It's a huge pleasure to welcome you all, writers, publishers and book lovers, to Clarence House.
Hidden within the walls of Britain's grandest estates are secrets the public was never meant to know. But what unfolded inside Queen Consort Camilla's private mansion left even hardened investigators speechless. It began quietly with whispers of a sealed chamber, rumors dismissed as fanciful stories of old stone and fading royalty. Yet when the FBI, working alongside British intelligence, arrived at the secluded residence, they were not prepared for what they would uncover. Floorboards were carefully removed, layer by layer, until the agents froze. Their expressions drained of color as they realized they were staring into a hidden world, untouched for decades. Inside lay objects and documents so disturbing they shook the very image of the royal household. What was found beneath Camilla's mansion? And why has it remained hidden all these years? Tonight we reveal the mystery that left the FBI pale with fear. The mysterious mansion. Tucked away in the quiet countryside of Wiltshire stands a residence that few outsiders have ever entered. Unlike Buckingham Palace or Clarence House, this mansion is not a place of state banquets or ceremonial pageantry. It is a private retreat, an estate surrounded by rolling hills, high hedges, and iron gates that keep curious eyes at a distance. For decades it has served as a sanctuary for Camilla, a place to withdraw from the relentless demands of royal life. From the outside, it looks like any other grand English country home, with ivy climbing its stone walls and manicured gardens stretching toward the horizon. Yet those who have studied its history know that this house carries shadows far darker than its elegant facade suggests. The property itself has roots that stretch back to the 18th century. Built by an aristocratic family whose wealth rose and fell with the tides of empire, it passed through the hands of dukes, earls, and distant cousins before finding its way into Camilla's possession. Locals speak of tunnels beneath the estate, once said to be used by servants, smugglers, and during the war, even operatives who passed messages in the dead of night. Most of these tales were dismissed as folklore, the kind of stories told in pubs to entertain travelers. Still, they persisted, whispering with a kind of knowing conviction, as if the villagers sensed the house was holding back more than it revealed. Camilla valued the mansion not just for its privacy, but for its history. Rooms were filled with antique furniture, portraits of forgotten lords and ladies, and books whose spines cracked with the touch of age. Guests who visited described the atmosphere as dignified but heavy, as if the walls themselves had witnessed secrets that no one dared to repeat. The floors creaked in odd places, doors opened onto corridors that ended abruptly, and fireplaces seemed to draw smoke into hidden vents that led nowhere. Every corner of the house hinted at another story waiting to be told. It was within this setting that the first whispers of something concealed began to circulate. Maintenance workers occasionally reported strange drafts rising from beneath the floorboards. Gardeners spoke of uneven ground near the east wing. A caretaker once claimed to hear muffled sounds beneath the drawing room, though no one believed him. Such remarks were shrugged off at the time, but when rumors reached ears far beyond the village, curiosity grew in places where curiosity is rarely idle. The mansion stood as both a symbol of continuity and a relic of the past. It represented the charm of English nobility while concealing layers that no architect's plan seemed willing to reveal. To the public, it was a tranquil retreat for the Queen Consort. To those who knew better, it was a puzzle box waiting to be unlocked. And when investigators finally set foot inside with authority and purpose, they were about to confirm what generations of quiet whispers had always suggested. This house was hiding something extraordinary. A whisper reaches Washington. The story of Camilla's countryside retreat might have remained a matter of local folklore had it not been for one detail that refused to fade into silence. Chapter 1 left us standing at the threshold of mystery, staring at a house that seemed to breathe with secrets. That whisper of unease would soon travel farther than anyone imagined, crossing oceans and stirring interest in the most unexpected of places. It began quietly with a letter. No one knows exactly who wrote it. Some claim it was a former estate worker, embittered and eager for revenge. The letter did not reach the press, nor did it find its way into the gossip columns. Instead, it slipped through channels that lead not to newsrooms but to intelligence desks. The recipient was an American contact with ties to both history and security, a person accustomed to weighing whispers for their grain of truth. The words were simple yet chilling. The writer insisted that beneath the floors of Camilla's mansion lay evidence long buried, evidence tied not only to forgotten family scandals, but to sensitive dealings that could cast shadows on the monarchy itself. At first glance, it seemed too fanciful, too dramatic, and yet something about the precision of the description made it difficult to dismiss. Specific rooms were named, exact measurements given, details only someone with knowledge of the estate could provide. When the letter reached Washington, it did not vanish into a drawer. It landed on the desk of officials who understood the weight of history and the risks of secrets left to fester. In a world where alliances between nations are often sealed not only by treaties but by shared information, even a whisper about the British royal household carried significance. To ignore it would have been careless. To investigate it, however, would require discretion of the highest order. British intelligence was quietly informed. The exchange was delicate, for sovereignty is a sacred matter, especially when it touches the royal family. But the American agency pressed its concern. If there was truth in the letter, the implications could not be overlooked. The British side listened, considered, and finally conceded that a discreet inquiry might be necessary. To admit even that much was extraordinary. Thus, the stage was set for a partnership both uneasy and unusual. The FBI would lend expertise not in defiance of British authority, but in cooperation under the veil of secrecy. No public announcement, no official acknowledgement. Only a handful of individuals would know that American agents were preparing to set foot inside a private royal residence. What had started as a murmur in a countryside village had now reached the corridors of power across the Atlantic. Beneath the polished floors of Camilla's mansion, something waited. The question was not only what it was, but why it had been hidden for so long. As preparations began in hushed offices and sealed rooms, one truth became clear. The mystery of the mansion was no longer local lore. It was an international secret waiting to be unearthed. The Royal Guard versus the FBI. From the moment the letter reached Washington, the mystery of Camilla's mansion was no longer a quiet curiosity, but a guarded matter of international concern. In the previous chapter, we saw how whispers traveled from Wiltshire to the desks of intelligence officers an ocean away. Now, those whispers were about to ignite tension at the very heart of British authority, for no agency approaches a royal household without consequence. The Queen Consort's security was entrusted not to ordinary officers, but to men and women who had devoted their lives to protecting the crown. The Royal Protection Command, a branch of the Metropolitan Police, stood as the first line of defense. These officers were not simply bodyguards. They were guardians of a tradition centuries old, trained to repel threats both seen and unseen. Their loyalty was to the monarchy above all else, and their instincts were to shield the family from intrusion, whether it came in the form of journalists, protesters, or, in this case, foreign agents. When whispers emerged that the FBI sought access to Camilla's private residence, the first reaction was disbelief. No one could recall a time when American investigators had ever been allowed inside such walls. The suggestion itself felt like a breach of etiquette, if not sovereignty. Meetings were called, documents reviewed, tempers flared. For the Royal Guard, the matter was simple. Their duty was to protect the sanctity of the Queen Consort's home. For the FBI, the matter was equally clear. They had received intelligence too detailed to dismiss, and in their judgment, the potential consequences of doing nothing outweighed the discomfort of crossing into sensitive territory. Behind closed doors, British intelligence officials attempted to balance the scales. They reminded the Guard that secrecy was not the same as safety. If the chamber described in the letter did indeed exist, and if its contents were as grave as hinted, then silence would not protect the monarchy but threaten it. The FBI would not march through the gates in dramatic fashion, nor would they act independently. They would operate alongside trusted British officials, with every step monitored, every action approved. It was not a gesture of hospitality, but one of control. Still, the tension was palpable when the agents first arrived. Black vehicles pulled discreetly into the grounds under cover of dusk. Inside the mansion, Camilla's own staff whispered nervously, uncertain of what was unfolding. The royal guard kept their distance, yet watched with eyes sharpened by suspicion. To them, the presence of foreign operatives felt like an intrusion, a shadow of distrust cast upon their own competence. To the FBI, the guarded stares were expected. They knew they were walking into a world where every glance and gesture carried the weight of history. As both sides stood in uneasy proximity, the true test of cooperation was about to begin. Beneath the polished floors of the mansion lay the object of their mission. A secret powerful enough to unite two nations in silence, yet divide two protective forces in principle. The Royal Guard saw an intrusion. The FBI saw an investigation. Neither side yet realized that what waited under the floorboards would leave them both unsettled, bound together by a discovery neither loyalty nor protocol could undo. Beneath the polished floors, the uneasy truce between the Royal Guard and the FBI set the stage for what would become one of the most delicate operations ever carried out inside a private royal residence. In the previous chapter, the two sides had stood face to face, each bristling with suspicion and pride, each unwilling to yield ground. But beneath the tension lay a shared curiosity, a gnawing awareness that something extraordinary might be hidden just underfoot. It was that silent agreement which led them to the drawing room of Camilla's countryside mansion, a room draped in velvet curtains and lined with portraits of ancestors long forgotten. It was here that the floor would give way to secrets. The choice of location was not arbitrary. The mysterious letter had spoken with unnerving precision, naming the East Wing's drawing room as the place to begin. According to the writer, beneath its polished oak panels lay an opening that had not been touched in decades. Workers were summoned under the strictest confidentiality. Their tools were wrapped to muffle sound, their movements watched closely by both American agents and British security officers who never let their gaze wander. At first glance, the floor looked impeccable. The planks had been sanded and shined until they gleamed under the light of the chandeliers. But closer inspection revealed subtle irregularities. One corner of the room seemed to slope ever so slightly, a flaw masked by carpets and furniture. When a tool was pressed against the edge of a board, it shifted with an ease that betrayed its age. This was no ordinary flooring. It had been laid with purpose, perhaps even with the intention of concealment. The first board was lifted slowly, as if the weight of centuries clung to it. Dust rose in the air, carrying with it the stale scent of disuse. Beneath the board was not solid foundation, but a hollow gap, a cavity that seemed to breathe as the air escaped. The agents exchanged glances, their composure betraying a flicker of unease. More boards followed, each one pulled back with cautious hands. The opening widened, revealing a dark space below that swallowed the lamplight and seemed to stretch farther than anyone expected. It was at that moment the atmosphere shifted. The grandeur of the drawing room, once filled with the quiet dignity of portraits and polished furniture, now felt intrusive, as though it were merely a veil draped over something ancient and unsettling. Even the Royal Guard, who had argued so fiercely to keep outsiders at bay, stood motionless, their silence betraying a reluctant acknowledgement. The floor was not a floor at all, but a lid, a cover concealing a secret room. The FBI prepared lights, their beams piercing the void below. Dust swirled in the narrow shafts of illumination, and the outline of stone walls began to emerge. The chamber beneath was real. It had been sealed with careful precision, its existence hidden for perhaps a century or more. And yet, as the agents peered into the hollow darkness, none dared speak. They sensed that this was only the beginning, that what lay beyond those boards would not simply rewrite the story of one house, but disturb the image of the monarchy itself. The first breach had been made, and with it the mansion's long silence had been broken. The drawing room of Camilla's countryside mansion was silent except for the faint creak of shifting boards. In the previous chapter, the polished oak planks had been lifted away to reveal a hollow darkness beneath, a void that seemed to breathe with secrets too long buried. Now, with the floor removed and the air heavy with dust, the question lingered like a chill. What exactly lay hidden beneath this royal retreat? An iron ladder, old but sturdy, was discovered bolted against the stone wall beneath the opening. Its rungs were coated with rust, yet they remained intact, suggesting that someone long ago had placed it there with the expectation it might one day be used again. One of the agents adjusted his lamp and descended slowly, each step echoing against the walls like a drumbeat. The others followed, their boots carrying the weight of caution as they entered a space untouched by light for decades. The chamber was larger than expected. The walls were lined with rough stone, still damp in places from the earth pressing against them. The air was thick and stale, a smell of paper, mold, and something older, as though time itself had been sealed away. Their beams of light swept across the room, illuminating fragments that at first seemed ordinary. A broken chair, a crate splintered with age, and shelves carved into the stone itself. But as the dust settled, the truth of the room began to take shape. Documents lay scattered on the ground, their edges yellowed and curling. Some were bundled with twine that had long since frayed, while others were sealed in leather folios that bore crests and symbols still visible despite the passing of years. Along the shelves, boxes were stacked with meticulous care, each marked with faded ink. The handwriting was elegant, the kind that belonged to another century, and yet it carried a sense of urgency, as though someone had hidden them not merely for safekeeping, but for protection. At the center of the chamber stood a table, its surface covered in dust thick enough to mute the color of the wood. Upon it rested a collection of objects that made the agents pause. There were candlesticks melted to stubs, a silver cross tarnished to black, and a diary whose cover was cracked with age but whose pages appeared intact. The silence deepened as each object revealed itself under the lights. These were not random possessions abandoned by careless hands. They had been placed here with deliberation, preserved in a vault meant to remain hidden. For a moment, no one spoke. The royal guard, who had resisted the intrusion so fiercely, looked on with faces drained of certainty. Even they could not deny that something extraordinary had been concealed beneath the mansion. The FBI agents exchanged glances, their earlier resolve shaken by the weight of what they had uncovered. The chamber had emerged at last, no longer a whispered rumor but a living reality. And though its contents were only beginning to reveal themselves, one truth became undeniable. This was not merely a storage room forgotten by history. It was a vault of secrets, sealed with intention, waiting for its story to be told. Artifacts that shouldn't exist. The hidden chamber had revealed itself at last, its air stale and its shadows clinging to every stone. In the previous chapter, the agents and guards descended into the darkness and discovered that this was no ordinary basement. It was a vault, carefully sealed and deliberately hidden, filled with objects and documents that had waited in silence for generations. What they would now uncover, under the cold beams of their lamps, would shake both duty and belief. The first item to draw their attention was the diary. It lay upon the dust-caked table as though left there in haste, its leather binding cracked and fragile, yet still bearing the impression of a family crest. When opened, the pages resisted, brittle but legible. The handwriting was elegant, the style of a bygone century, and it spoke in tones of secrecy and fear. The entries referenced meetings at midnight, coded exchanges and transactions that hinted at scandals never spoken of in public. Some recognizable from history books, others unknown but carrying titles of nobility. The discovery of such a document was enough to leave the room in silence, for its contents suggested that the chamber itself had been designed as a hiding place for dangerous truths. Alongside the diary, the agents began to examine the sealed boxes stacked against the walls. One was carefully pried open, revealing bundles of correspondence tied with faded ribbons. The letters bore signatures, wax seals, and markings that belonged to figures long past from the stage of history. Some of these names were woven into the very fabric of British politics, men and women who had influenced wars, treaties, and alliances. Yet the words contained within these letters did not speak of noble deeds. They spoke of debts, of secret liaisons, and of compromises that would have destroyed reputations had they ever been revealed. Then came the objects that puzzled me the most. A small collection of artifacts sat on a shelf as though placed there with deliberate reverence. Among them was a silver chalice engraved with symbols that did not match any known royal insignia, its surface darkened by age, but its design unmistakably intricate. Beside it rested a dagger, its blade rusted, yet its hilt studded with stones that glimmered faintly under the lamplight. Wrapped in cloth was an ornate crown like circlet, too small for a monarch's head, perhaps ceremonial, perhaps something else entirely. These items did not appear in any catalogs of royal possessions, and yet they had been preserved with care, as if their value lay not in wealth, but in what they represented. As each artifact was revealed, the unease in the chamber deepened. The royal guard, once so certain of their authority, now stood pale and uncertain, their eyes darting between the agents and the relics. The FBI team documented everything with precision, yet their faces betrayed the same pallor. These were artifacts that should not exist, records that contradicted official history, and evidence that the monarchy itself had harbored secrets far darker than the world was ever meant to know. The silence grew heavier, the weight of discovery pressing down on every soul present. The chamber was no longer just a room beneath a mansion. It had become a crossroads where truth, power, and secrecy collided. And what had been hidden here had the power to shake not only a family, but the image of a nation itself. The agent's uneasy silence. The chamber beneath Camilla's mansion had surrendered its secrets reluctantly, as if every page and relic carried a curse against exposure. In the previous chapter, the agents unearthed artifacts that seemed impossible, documents that whispered of scandals erased from history and objects that bore no place in any royal record. Now, as the dust settled and the evidence lay spread before them, the greatest weight of all pressed down: silence. No one spoke at first. The royal guard stood rigid, their hands behind their backs, their eyes fixed not on the artifacts but on the floor, as though refusing to acknowledge what had been revealed. Their loyalty to the monarchy demanded discretion, yet even their training could not disguise the unease etched across their faces. The FBI agents, for their part, moved methodically, photographing, cataloging, and noting every discovery, but their expressions betrayed something more than professionalism. They looked pale, shaken, as though each item uncovered demanded not only documentation, but a reckoning with the implications. One agent closed the diary carefully, his gloved hands lingering on the cracked leather cover. He glanced at his colleagues, then at the British officers watching him closely, but said nothing. Another crouched before a crate filled with letters, her breath caught in her throat as she recognized a name that should never have appeared in such a place. She, too, remained silent. Words hung in the air, unspoken, for to give them voice would make the discoveries real in a way none were prepared to confront. The chamber seemed to absorb their unease. Dust swirled lazily in the beams of their lamps, and every small sound, the scrape of a boot on stone, the snap of a camera shutter, echoed with unnatural clarity. Time itself felt slowed, as though the room demanded reverence, forbidding haste or careless speech. The silence was not simply professional restraint. It was a silence born of fear, for the agents knew what these documents implied. They suggested not just hidden scandals, but connections, influences, and betrayals that could ripple across centuries, reaching into the very foundations of power. One guard finally broke the silence, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You must understand," he said, "some things are not meant to be seen." His words carried neither threat nor plea, but something heavier, the weight of centuries of duty. The agents did not respond. Their training demanded impartiality, but their faces revealed the same conflict. To uncover such truths was one thing. To decide what to do with them was another. As the team prepared to leave the chamber, sealing each box and carefully wrapping each fragile artifact, their silence only deepened. They carried more than evidence up that iron ladder. They carried questions, doubts, and a dawning awareness that history itself had fissures no one had dared admit. The unease was not simply about what they had found, but about what they were now bound to protect, perhaps even conceal. When the last board was placed back over the opening, and the drawing room restored to its polished perfection, it was as though nothing had happened. Yet everyone present knew the truth. Beneath the floor still lay a hidden world that had left even the most hardened investigators pale. The silence would follow them, haunting each step, for some discoveries cannot be spoken aloud without changing everything. What the royals knew and what they didn't. When the last plank was replaced and the drawing room returned to its outward elegance, the unease that haunted the agents lingered like a shadow. In the previous chapter, silence had become the heaviest burden, binding both the Royal Guard and the FBI to secrets that threatened to undo centuries of carefully crafted history. Yet one question pressed against every mind, a question that refused to remain buried. Did Camilla herself know? And if she did not, who within the royal lineage had hidden such a chamber, and why had its existence been shrouded for so long? The Queen Consort's mansion had always been described as a refuge, a place of quiet retreat from the constant scrutiny of palace life. Camilla was known for her preference for privacy, for evenings by the fire with a book rather than the glare of public appearances. Those who knew her best often remarked that she valued the house not for its grandeur but for its comfort. To imagine that beneath her favorite drawing room lay a vault filled with documents and relics of scandal seemed almost impossible. Yet impossibility had already been breached when the chamber revealed itself. The Royal Guard speculated in whispers that perhaps Camilla had inherited the estate without knowledge of its deeper layers. After all, the mansion's history stretched back more than 2 centuries, passing through families who each left their imprint before the crown took ownership. It was entirely plausible that the chamber had been sealed long before Camilla ever crossed the threshold. And yet the precision with which the chamber had been hidden, the deliberate care in preserving its contents, suggested that someone with great influence had not only known of its existence, but intended for it to remain untouched. The diary offered clues, though they were written in the guarded language of another age. It hinted at meetings in the mansion, meetings of individuals who feared discovery. The names inscribed on the letters pointed to figures whose alliances extended into politics and foreign courts. Could Camilla have stumbled upon any of these details in her time within the house? If she had never spoken of them. Her public words about the estate had always been light and affectionate, remarks about gardens and family gatherings, never about locked doors or suspicious spaces. Yet within the royal household itself, knowledge often flowed in quiet channels, passed down in whispers from one generation to the next. It was possible that the chamber had been spoken of behind closed doors, a secret confined to those deemed trustworthy enough to carry it forward. If so, then silence was as much a duty as loyalty. Perhaps Camilla knew fragments but not the full truth. Perhaps she knew nothing at all. Or perhaps she knew everything and chose never to speak. For the agents and the guard, the uncertainty was more unsettling than the discovery itself. To uncover evidence is one matter. To grasp the intentions behind it is another. The unanswered question remained, lodged like a stone in the heart of the investigation. What the royals knew, and what they did not, would determine whether the chamber was an accident of history or a deliberate design of secrecy. And until that truth surfaced, the mansion would stand not only as a royal retreat, but as a riddle that refused to be solved. The unanswered questions. The discovery beneath Camilla's mansion was never meant to be public knowledge, yet the weight of it refused to stay buried. In the previous chapter, questions swirled around what the royals may have known and what had been deliberately concealed. Now, in the aftermath of the FBI's descent into the hidden chamber, uncertainty spread like a quiet contagion through corridors of power in both London and Washington. The chamber had been closed again, the boards carefully replaced, the drawing room restored to its outward perfection, but for those who had stood in the shadows beneath it, life would never be the same. Parliament heard whispers before long. They were never spoken in official sessions, never recorded in documents, but carried instead in private conversations over brandy, or in hushed tones exchanged in dimly lit hallways. Some members of the government wanted answers, while others warned against digging too deeply. The monarchy stood at the heart of Britain's identity, and to expose evidence that could tarnish its image was a step few dared to take. Yet silence itself carried its own risks. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. Senior advisors met more frequently, conversations lengthened, and requests for information grew sharper. Camilla herself carried on with her usual schedule, smiling in public, her voice warm and steady. But behind the scenes, staff speculated whether she knew the cause of the tension brewing around her. If she was aware, she gave no sign. If she was not, then she had become the unknowing figurehead of a mystery large enough to unsettle two governments. The FBI agents who had been part of the operation returned to their desks with heavy files but heavier hearts. Their reports documented every object, every scrap of paper, but the words they wrote felt inadequate. How could a file capture the chill of the chamber, the sense that they had stumbled upon a hidden history meant never to be spoken? Their superiors debated what to do with the findings. Should the documents be preserved in secret archives? Should they be shared or destroyed? Each option carried consequences, and none came without danger. For the royal guard, the burden was heavier still. Their loyalty bound them to silence, but the memory of what they had seen lingered each time they stood watch outside the Queen Consort's doors. They had sworn to protect her, yet they now carried the knowledge of a threat far different from a protester or an intruder. It was the threat of history itself, waiting beneath the floorboards, ready to surface if ever the silence was broken. And so the unanswered questions grew. Who had built the chamber? Why had it been sealed? What secrets did the monarchy intend to preserve, and what price would be paid if they came to light? These questions lingered like smoke in the air, clinging to those who had entered the chamber and those who only heard whispers of its existence. The mansion returned to its peaceful facade, the gardens blooming, the countryside quiet. Yet beneath that calm lay a secret too large to ignore and too dangerous to reveal. What lies hidden beneath the polished floors of Camilla's mansion may never be fully revealed to the public, but one truth is clear. The secrets of the past still cast long shadows over the present. The FBI's discovery left agents pale, the royal guard silent, and the monarchy itself under a veil of unanswered questions. Some mysteries remain buried, but their echoes refuse to fade. What do you think about this story? Please share your thoughts in the comments. If you found this investigation as gripping as we did, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. Join us again as we uncover more hidden truths behind royal walls and untold chapters of history.